So you ever had the situation where you're throwing a barbecue at 6 o'clock, it's 6:30, you look up and you got guests standing around with empty plates and you're sitting there shitting your pants because your meat's not even close to being ready.
I am never gonna financially recover from this.
Well, that's because you didn't have this video to help you properly plan your barbecue. Well, today I'm giving you a simple formula so that you know exactly how much meat you need to buy for your barbecue party. You know exactly how long it's gonna take to cook, and you can reverse engineer your way to knowing exactly when to put it on the smoker. Now let's go ahead and make sure your brother-in-law and your father-in-law know that you're the pit master in the family. Woo! So I see these questions all the time in the barbecue Facebook groups. I have a brisket, I wanna have it cooked by 6 p.m. When do I put it on the smoker? Or I'm feeding 25 people tomorrow and I don't know how much meat I need to feed those people. And other questions. Well, today I'm gonna make it really easy for you and I'm gonna break it down into 3 parts. First part is talking about how much meat you actually need to buy for your barbecue. This is gonna help you save money, but also you're gonna know exactly how much meat you need to feed a certain amount of people. Second is we're gonna talk about how long each piece of meat takes to cook at very particular temperatures so that you can properly plan. In part 3, we're gonna put those first 2 parts together and we're gonna reverse engineer our way to a start time so that you know exactly when to put your meat on the smoker. That way, by the end of this video, you're gonna have a step-by-step barbecue game plan. So instead of stressing about an event that's coming up this weekend, you're gonna make it look easy. Because being a pit master is way more than being able to cook a perfect brisket. Let's talk about one of the most asked questions that I get, and that's how much meat do I buy? Because not all of the weight will actually make it to the plate. And I have an idiot-proof formula to tell you exactly how much meat you need to buy. But before I reveal the formula,
let's talk about meat shrinkage.
Because in order for the formula to work, we need to know how much weight we can actually yield from each piece of meat. And every cut of meat shrinks. You can't expect to buy a 20-pound brisket and serve 20 pounds of brisket. So let's talk about 4 of the most common cuts of meat that are cooked at people's barbecue. First one we'll talk about is the king of barbecue, and that's brisket. And it's easy to understand why. The shit is delicious, but it's expensive. So knowing how much meat you can actually yield from it is very important. So let's say you have a 20-pound brisket. By the time you trim it and cook it, you're gonna get about 45 to 50%. Closer to 50%, but it's give or take. It really depends on how heavy-handed you are when you're trimming the brisket. Next, if you wanna go inexpensive, you can always go with pork shoulder. Pork shoulder is great, feeds a lot of people, and it costs a lot less than brisket. So with pork shoulder, you're gonna end up with about 55 to 60% of the meat that you put on the smoker. So if you put a 10-pound pork shoulder on the smoker, you're gonna get 5.5 to 6 pounds of meat that you can serve at your barbecue. This does also come down to if you have a boneless or bone-in. If you have bone-in, you're closer to the 55%. And if you're boneless, you're more 60 to 65% if you're lucky. Next is a fan favorite, and that's ribs. Now, ribs are really easy to figure out how much you need for a group of people. You know, 1 rack of ribs is gonna feed about 3 or 2 really hungry people. For example, baby back ribs usually feed about 2 or 3 people, whereas St. Louis or spare ribs can feed up to 4. So I end up averaging it out, and if I'm buying ribs for a barbecue, I'm gonna average it out to 3. So if you got 21 people, you need 7 racks of ribs. I know that's not cheap, right? Next is gonna be whole chicken and whole turkey. Your yield percentage from a whole chicken or turkey is gonna be 50 to 65%. And the reason there's such a big gap is because it comes down to how precise you are with your knife. If you're not very good at breaking down the chicken, you're gonna end up closer to 50%. But if you're like me and you're surgical with it, you're gonna get 60 to 65%. So now that we know what the yield percentages of these meats are, let's talk about the formula that I keep promising. The simplest way to do this is to first determine how much meat you want to serve to each person. A good rule of thumb is about 1/2 pound of meat per person. So if you're doing pulled pork, for example, when you take your meat off the smoker, you need to be able to serve 1/2 pound to each person. So that doesn't mean go out and buy a 10-pound Boston butt for 20 people, because that's never gonna work. It's gonna cook down. So you know you wanna serve 1/2 pound, that is 0.50. You also know that the yield percentage of a pork butt is around 0.55 to 0.6. Let's go 0.55 just to be conservative. Now I'm not Rain Man, so let me get my handy dandy calculator. So we need to do 0.50 divided by 0.55, which is the yield percentage for the pork butt. That's going to give us 0.90. And you can take that number and apply it to any number of people. For example, if I have a party with 25 people at it, I multiply 0.90 by 25, and that gives me 22.72. Let's round up to 23. So I need 23 pounds of raw pork shoulder. When that cooks down and renders, that should leave me with half a pound per person.
I don't know where I am. I can't breathe.
I can't explain it no simpler than that. It works. And that is my secret formula. So now that you know how much meat you need to buy for your party, let's talk about how long it's going to take to cook it. What I would like to do is get away from this idea that meat is done when it's done, and you can't rush perfection.
We can say dinner's at 7 o'clock, but really, the meat will be ready at about 11. Why?
Those are all excuses for not properly planning your barbecue. They're bullshit. Now, I will admit that there is truth to the fact that meat is ready when it's ready, but it is ridiculous to think that you can't estimate the barbecue planning and cooking time based off of a particular piece of meat and the cooking temperature that you're gonna use. So let's jump right into it, and we're gonna talk about brisket. Now, for brisket, if you're going low and slow, you're going 225, and you're probably looking at about 1.5 hours per pound at low and slow 225. So if you have a 10-pound brisket, it's going to take you 15 hours to smoke it. Now, I like to jump up, and my sweet spot is 275. And that's going to drop you down to about 1 hour to 1 hour and 15 minutes per pound. So if you have a 10-pound brisket, you're looking at 10 hours to 12.5 hours maximum. And with beef, a lot of people will even jump up to 300 degrees. You're looking more at 45 minutes to 1 hour per pound. So if you got a 10-pound brisket, you're doing 7.5 hours to 10 hours, cutting your time down significantly. Next, let's talk about pork shoulder. Surprisingly, pork shoulder at 225 is actually going to take longer per pound at 1.5 to 2 hours per pound for a pork shoulder. But like I said, the sweet spot for me is 275, and that cuts your time down to about 1 hour to 1.5 hours per pound. So if you have an 8-pound pork shoulder, you're looking at 8 hours to 12 hours. Next are ribs. Ribs are pretty easy to calculate because we don't really go based off of the weight of a rib. A lot of people would do something called a 3-2-1 method. Obviously that's 3 hours, 2 hours, 1 hour, totaling 6 total hours. So you can follow that formula and just plan 6 hours for barbecue ribs. But if you're cooking without wrapping, I like to do that method. I'll actually plan for about 6 hours for baby back ribs. And for spares St. Louis, I'll plan 7 hours. And these are at temperatures of 225. If you crank those temperatures up, they're obviously gonna cook faster, so just plan accordingly. And next is gonna be whole chicken and whole turkey. These do vary quite a bit between each other. A whole chicken that's about 5 pounds, being smoked at 225, is gonna take you about 4 hours. And that's more towards the high end for a 5-pound whole chicken. I like to actually crank the temperature up to about 300, and I can finish a whole bird in about 2 hours. Now, for whole turkey, if you're cooking at 225, you need to plan for about 30 minutes per pound. So if you have a 10-pound turkey, it's gonna take you 5 hours at 225. Again, I crank the temperature up. I can usually finish a whole turkey in 3.5 hours at about 275 to 300. So now that we went over those first two parts, let's put them together and fabricate a scenario so that we can show you this working in practice. The sun's coming out, it's beautiful. Flowers are blooming. Birds are singing. Taxes just hit the bank account.
Hell yeah! Hey, come on, baby! Come on! Yes! Come on! Ah!
You want to throw a barbecue party. So the wife gets on the phone, she starts calling people. After calling everyone, getting confirmations, being left on red by half the people you texted, you come to the conclusion that there will be 25 people at this barbecue that you're throwing on Saturday. So with 25 people, you're like, you know what, let's do pulled pork. I told you the good rule of thumb is to serve half a pound of meat per person. So you need to have a half a pound of meat that you can serve to people when you pull the pork shoulder off of the smoker. Now, get your calculator out, because using that formula that I gave you earlier, you're gonna come up with how much meat you need to buy. So we want to serve a half a pound to each person. That's 0.50. Put that in your calculator. Divide it by the yield percentage for pork butt, which is 55%. So we're going to divide 0.50 by 0.55. That's going to give you 0.909. So let's 91, right? So we want to take 0.91, and you can multiply this by however many people you want, but in this case, it's 25 people. Multiply that by 25. You need to buy 23 pounds of meat. So 23 pounds of raw pork shoulder. Now you can get to 23 pounds however you see fit, but they don't sell 23 pound pork shoulders. So you're probably going to buy an 8 pound, an 8 pound, and a 7 pound. That gets you to 23 pounds. Now, your largest cut of meat is 8 pounds. So we're going to base the estimation of the cook time on 8 pounds. Don't be a dumbass and estimate it on 23 pounds. That's just not smart. And I hope it's common sense. You also decide on the cooking temperature of 275. And that's because Joe from Fork and Denver's YouTube channel said it's his sweet spot, and that guy has never steered you wrong before.
I'm gonna be telling you why I think the Boston butt is the best piece of meat.
So now that we have all of those variables calculated, we know the number of people, we know how much meat we need, and we know how fast it's gonna cook. So now that we have all those variables calculated, we're gonna use them to work our way backwards to an actual start time. Step one is figuring out what time you want to serve people the food. We're gonna say 6 p.m. on Saturday. Step two is figuring out how much time you need for resting your meat. For a pork shoulder, I'm gonna go with about 3 hours. This is completely up to you, and what I need to do is subtract that 3 hours from my serving time. So I go from 6 to 3. The meat needs to come off of the smoker at 3 p.m. to be able to serve it at 6 p.m. For step three, we need our calculator. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna take the cooking temperature, 275. We said that that's about an hour to hour and a half per pound. To be conservative, I'm gonna go with an hour and a half. So we're gonna take 8 pounds, multiply that by 1.5. Our total cook time is 12 hours. So if we are supposed to be pulling this thing off the smoker at 3 p.m., we need to be throwing it on the smoker at 3 a.m. That doesn't mean walking your happy ass outside and starting the smoker. Unless you got a pellet, go ahead. Anyone else cooking with real fire, they need to be out there having already started their smoker, having it ready. Your meat needs to be seasoned and being on the smoker at 3 a.m. Now, I have a step 4, but step 4, hopefully you don't need it, but there are things that you can do to overcome 2 situations that might happen. First situation, not a big deal. Your meat finishes early. Whatever, right? You can do something called a faux cambro. That's really just wrapping it in aluminum foil, wrapping it in towels, and putting it in a cooler. The other thing that might happen that you need to think about, and this is when you're probably shitting bricks, you might hit a stall that's unusually long. So you're like, oh shit. If you're concerned about that, just wrap it in foil or butcher's paper and crank the temperature up. You'll push right through that stall. Not a big deal. Boom. Now you got a good ass barbecue platter you can share with everybody and you're happy. So look, these tips here are your golden ticket to a stress-free barbecue. People's gonna ask you, how do you make it look so easy? And you're gonna say, go to YouTube, type in Fork and Denver's and follow that guy so that they can also learn all this cool information that I'm sharing with you. Hold your friends accountable and have them go subscribe. But listen, if you found this helpful, look, I do YouTube part-time, maybe one day full-time, but it's up to you guys. You need to go subscribe. If you're watching this right now, go subscribe. Like, come on, man. You know this information is valuable. Go subscribe. If you like the video, go ahead and hit the like button. Some of you do, some of you don't. I'm guilty of it. I'll watch a video, I love it, and I still won't hit the like button. I don't know. I'll start doing it myself. Maybe even to my own videos. I wonder if that would help the algorithm. And third, hit the notification bell. When I post a video, ding, you're gonna get a notification. But anyway, I'll catch you on a flippity flop.